up like the cataract. Google it, we ain't dropping any rhetoric. Or maybe so, but that's for you to find out. Don't get tossed to and fro by any loudmouth. What you think it's Indiana Jones, son? It's the year of the feast, we gon' grow some. Time to put some meat in the bones. Gotta put the milk down, son, it's time to leave home. I'm just saying there's a time in the season you gotta be a Berean. If you just hear and believe it, you could be walking with demons. It could be rendering season. All the things that go to God, that's a little like treason. Wait, welcome back, my friends. Did you ever really think we could pass the 10? Our stock's up, we about to trend. Cause the whole 36 wanna rap again. Wait, sounds so good to be true. Like rabbinic candy land, ain't no ladders, just shoot. We hold true if it's loaded in the cannon. Best believe it's understanding. If it's not, it ain't proof. Like sacred name of the two-house frame. ES start to tickle, then you feel it in the planks. You better not, you be better off. Not trying to hassle Hoff, you can take it to the bank. This night rider, he's about to go off. Put the ring on your finger from the Cracker Jack box. It's hide and seek, let's see if you can find out all the little messages you hear before the timeout. Ever seen a scholar with a blue belt? I have, he's about to make your food melt. The loud one and he strikes again, but don't let him close range, he gon' bite your friends. So relax, got it still in control. He knows every care, every bit that you hold. He knows every hair, every need for your soul. Nothing new around here, this story's been told. I bet you feel weak and your life is in tatters. With bruised feet, your body is battered. You can't reach, trying to climb up that ladder. Sit back and hold fast till Messiah matters.
These guys are laughing.
It is Wednesday, June 24th, 2025. This is Messiah Matters number 518. I'm finally organized around here. My name is Caleb Hegg.
I am not organized. I am Rob Vanoff.
I had a feeling. You know how good it feels? I don't know how many books I have in this office now. Now, it wasn't long ago, a couple weeks, and I had like 50. My son counted them one day. Anyway, now I have a double bookshelf over here, and it has all of my my New Testament commentaries. So Matthew through Revelation, and I think it's plus 100, just commentaries. So pretty pumped about that. And I haven't even cataloged these back here. So good times. Yeah.
Nice. It looks like a mighty wall.
Well, I got to tell you, I started, it looks like a earthquake would be bad. I'll tell you, I started my studies in 1 Corinthians, and the free Bible study on 1 Corinthians is going to start probably September, beginning of September. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And it's going to be fun. We're going to have a good time. Anyway, I got to say, having a plethora of commentaries it's invaluable. It makes it so much easier. I have, I think maybe 15 or 16 commentaries on 1 Corinthians, and man, that makes life a whole lot easier. So anyway, and the best part is that we're not just parroting. We won't just parrot other scholars. I got my own ideas on what's going on in some of the places of 1 Corinthians. So that's why I wanted to do it. It's like my Mount Everest, right? Like I got to climb it at some point. Wish I knew Greek a little bit better. But I got to say, because of my teacher, I know my Greek well enough to be able to stumble through and know what they're talking about. So, yeah. How's it going with you, man?
It's going well. Finishing my my first book, which is on Psalm 82. My other book's not really a book. It was a compilation of writings over like 15 years. So that should be out by July 1st. I think it'll be available.
The book on...
And it'll touch on, because I'm doing a summer workshop on Psalm 82 as well.
Right.
But they overlap a little bit, but the book goes into much more detail. But yeah, really excited about that. Learned so much. Oh man. But basically, two views of Psalm 82, and go into the history of interpretation and that.
I had a question for you. Or, well, I had a question. I had a question sent to me. This is, by the way, this is not on our show notes. So this is coming to Rob, hot off the press. He's never heard this from me. Okay, so is your course on Psalm 82 going to at all look at other theological trappings of like the Heiserites?
It'll touch on them. But, I've been working on Jude for years but the whole journey started way before I knew who Heiser was, right, on Deuteronomy 32. And because I was a Masorah geek, I was looking at the question of, well, wait a minute, what's the original reading? Some people say Deuteronomy 32 says sons of God, angels of God, sons of Israel. And then the scholars have different arguments for why that is. Well, Heiser, that was one point where Heiser found a foothold. I was like, well, if I study this, you have to study Psalm 82. And if I study Psalm 82, you have to look at Jude. And you know what I mean? All these things are connected.
So the reason I ask you this is because this is the text message I got yesterday.
Okay.
Hi, we're the Nephilim giants. And is it thought that they were the result of fallen angels and human women? That's the text I got. Now, I know the person who sent it very well, actually. The person who sent it.
The Nephilim giants?
No, who were? We're the Nephilim giants.
Oh.
Like, were they or not? Now, the person who sent this, I know very well, and she's probably listening. So this is not but I thought it was interesting because I thought, man, Rob could wax boldly on this for a long time. If I remember correctly, now it's been a minute since I looked at the Nephilim, right? Now, I've always taken the view since before you came along, I took the view that they weren't fallen angels. I took the view that the Nephilim were men of renown. Mm-hmm. Now, and that's essentially what I said. But for the waiting audience, Rob, would you like to tip your hand a little bit? What do you think the Nephilim were?
I think that the giants idea comes from the Greek translation of Genesis 6. They didn't know how to translate the word Nephilim, and so they used gigantes. They used the Greek word that we transliterate as giants. But it just means like of the earth or something like that. But basically there's a conflation. I think that they're the men of renown. I think I don't believe they're offspring of, I totally reject Heiser's view.
I same here, but then I'm leading you down the primrose path here.
There were giants. There were, just like we've
completely
seen.
Agree. But the question naturally comes, then why did God want to wipe their offspring off the earth?
Well, for the same reason, Genesis 6 tells it's not just their offspring. The only people that survived were Noah and his sons. That means Noah's cousins, right? There were other of the line of Seth that got wiped away. So it's... this is the preview for... if you'd like to know more, take Rob's class on Psalm 82. No, I hope that. Well, Psalm 82, basically, God is he's mysterious in his ways, and he has a sense of humor.
Right, but obviously the reason that this plays in to Psalm 82 is because doesn't Heiser say that the Nephilim are actually the Elohim, right? That's how it plays in, right?
Well, he says that they're the gods of Canaan, or the gods of the nations,
right? Which he calls Elohim, though. By
I don't know if he calls them the Nephilim. I don't think that.
One of the things that I recognized, and I thought that there were some. We are so off topic. We haven't even touched a topic yet. When I read Heiser's book, it was like he was hopscotching around these rocks. Like it wasn't a straight path to get Elohim to mean gods or like angelic beings. Right. I was like, how is he like? He just assumed it's all of a sudden he assumes it, and then he assumes that his readers bought into it as well. which I did not. Anyway, okay, let's go to things that are on the docket. Hey, thanks a lot for being with us, everybody. We appreciate it. And yeah, let's do this. If you'd like to be a part of this conversation, you can be one. See Hegg at TorahResource.com, CHEGG at TorahResource.com. You can also call our comment line, 253-465-3205. You can go to Messiah Matters right now. The summer producer credits are up. They are a play on the TikTok logo, and we have some fun gifts for our producers. I've already sent out notices to our executive producers. If you'd like to become one, you can just simply buy the actual product on the site. At the bottom of the merchandise page, there's the producer credits, and we have a lightweight hoodie. We have a car magnet, so you don't have to ruin your car with a bumper sticker. You can take it off and put it wherever you want. Or we have, of course, a mug, this time
If
black.
you love us this week and then hate us next week.
Exactly. You can take it off. Exactly. That is exactly right.
And then if you love us again, you can put it back
Put it back on. Exactly. Agree with us, put it on. Disagree with us, take it off. Okay. You can also go to TorahResource.com for a ton of different materials. And TellUs.com, TellUsTorah.com is where you can sign up for Rob's class. And I would recommend. Do you have any good registrations yet? Usually registrations like that take off like half a week before it starts.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see where we're at. Yeah.
Okay, and
hopefully we'll get some people signed up, and it'll be a good course.
Yeah, go sign up today, and then subscribe for our YouTube channel if you haven't already, or press the like button. Okay, let's jump in. We had now this one. I told the person. Excuse me. I told Murray that we were going to talk about this. Now, what I did was I took 3 of his emails to me, and I kind of combined them into one. And so, yeah, that's why it might not. I might have to describe a little bit what is going on in this email. So Murray writes and he says, "How are we to apply Acts 10:15 to our theology, and how and why would interrupt this verse to mean, interpret, sorry. How and why would we interpret this verse to mean that God only cleansed the people of the home? I guess what I am saying is that if God did not cleanse all manners of Cornelius' life and house, then how does he remain clean? And if God is now cleansing all people without the use of the temple procedure, then why would we even worry about those laws? Lastly, we have no record of the Gentiles who converted, changing their lifestyle to live according to the food laws or ceremonial laws, do we? I know Paul and some of the disciples continued to participate in the temple worship, but is there any record of Gentiles doing this?" Okay, let's pause for just 1 second. So this was actually his first email. Okay, that was his whole first email. And basically, I'm going to tell you where Murray's going here so that people have a little bit of an understanding of what he's getting to. What he's getting to is that it seems to him, at least this is how I've read it, and if I misrepresent Murray, I apologize, Murray, but this is, I did write him back on this and ask him if this is what he was kind of saying. What I understand him to be saying is that in Acts 10:15, Cornelius is cleansed, and he's seeing this as cleansed from a temple perspective, like ritually cleansed. Okay, and so what he's saying is that once a person receives Christ, now it seems to him, according to this verse, that a person is ritually clean and doesn't have to do that anymore. And I think what he's getting at the end of this is we don't see Gentiles going to the temple. And we don't see them having to be cleansed to get into the temple, because Christianity never really, it doesn't seem like we have an influx of Gentiles into the temple. And so maybe this is because the Gentiles didn't feel like they had to go because they were already clean. Or, you don't have the temple guard slaying a bunch of Gentiles because they say, hey, I'm already clean because I received Christ. So basically the way that I'm interpreting his email is that when Cornelius accepts Christ, or when Peter has this vision, Cornelius has been cleansed ritually. And therefore, why would we need to do that anymore, right? And he even says in here, if God is now cleansing all people without the use of the temple procedure, then why would we even worry about those laws? Okay. And I wrote him back on that. So then his second email, I'll read the second portion of his email, and then we'll talk about it. So he says, so what I have been told is that ekatharsin is the same word that is used for ritually clean in the Greek Old Testament. This may be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. If that is correct, then it seems that God cleansed Cornelius without having to go to the temple. Okay, so I've written on the idea of sin sacrifice and cleansing and those kind of things before. However, I will pass this over to Rob in just one second. My belief is this, and I'll state my belief, and then Rob can tell me if I'm on the right track or not. What I believe is that there are two cleansings. There is a cleanse. Now we see this a bit in Hebrews. There's a cleansing in terms of the heavenly temple, where we are able to come into the presence of God. And the only way that we can do that is if we are cleansed by the blood of the Messiah. Now, we could talk about why the Messiah's blood only, right? Which gets into the deity of Christ and the idea that he is eternal in both ways, and all these, the virgin birth and all these things, okay? We could, the tenets of our faith rest on salvation in this, Our faith is based on these tenets because this is how we are cleansed for the heavenly temple. However, in the earthly temple, there is blood of bulls and goats. And what we see is that for the Yom Kippur sacrifice, and this is why the writer of the Hebrews uses it, is that atonement does not just mean your sins are taken away. Physical things in this world, like the altar, like the tent of meeting, like, the priest himself, become unclean, or they are touched by sin, and they have to be atoned for. The altar never sinned. The altar can't sin, it's not a thing. But it has to be atoned for. The priest has to make atonement for it. Why? Because there is sin in this world. Sin in this world essentially attaches to things and to people. And for them to come into this sacred space, which is the temple complex, they have to be cleansed again. Now, the arguments that people like R.L. Solberg have made against me on this is that Yeshua's death is sufficient for all. Now, I believe that Yeshua's death is sufficient for all. However, there is still sin in this world, and it still affects the physical things around us. And this is why I believe that in Ezekiel 46, 47, 48, we see that there is sin sacrifice again in a temple on earth. And that these laws of clean and unclean come back when the temple is rebuilt. Okay, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to let Rob go with it. Go.
Yeah, I think you're right on talking about, kind of thinking of it as two different kinds of, there's like a cleansing of the heart, because like Yeshua himself says, you Pharisees, you wash the outside of the cup, you leave the inside of the cup gross. And then, so everybody thinks you're super religious and pious and devoted to God, but actually it's a fraud. You're hypocrites because your hearts are far from God. So that's, I think what I hear you talking about, Caleb, is along that same line of like, well, how do we clean the inside of the cup? Like, what's going on here? And so Murray, it's Murray, right? Was that the name?
Yep, Murray.
Totally correct. That's just the aorist of katharizo. It's the same verb used in the Greek Torah. However, we have to look at it, back to Acts 10, what both in the vision and in Peter's explanation when he finally gets up to Cornelius's house. In the vision, it's what God has cleansed, don't call unclean, basically. And then when he says it, when he explains the vision, he says, God has shown me not to call any man unclean. So that doesn't mean all people are clean. It means that Peter is not to prejudge people based on their ethnicity. That's what it's about. Like the idea of the vision of the different animals was a map of the world, of Jews are like sheep, Egyptians are like, or the Syrophoenicians are like dogs. The Romans are like pigs. The Arabs are like donkeys, right? All these, and they're all unclean animals that stood as like a caricaturization of those people, and therefore they're unclean. Stay away from them. What it says is that you can't do that. You cannot. The promise of the Abrahamic covenant is that all the nations of the world are going to be participants in God's blessing, and they're going to be participants in God's blessing as from the nations. They're not converting to a new ethnicity, and they are full participants without. God is not changing himself. God is not changing. God's standard of holiness is not changing. So the question is like, well, from a first century Pharisaic viewpoint, it's like, well, but humans have to become holy. Humans have to do something to demonstrate that they're worthy. And we Jews have all these rules from the Torah. We've added all these fences to protect our meals, to make sure people wash their hands right. And we want to make sure people fast a couple times in the week to keep humble, that these are ways that we prepare ourselves to be holy like God is holy. And it sounds really good on the surface of it. And you had such extremes like at Qumran, where they believe that they become like angels, right? Like in Colossians. Caleb's got a commentary on Colossians. The idea that somehow that they're becoming angel-like in their worship, and it seems like there's a wisdom and an asceticism that brings people closer to God because you're withdrawing from the world. That's not what the new covenant is. The new covenant is God regenerating hearts of the elect, and it's God's act. But Peter wants to go around with the world, just like everybody else, go around in the world and say, okay, I already know the covenants with Israel, so Israel's pretty good. The Gentiles you have to be suspicious of and maybe avoid them altogether. I mean, Peter's not to be blamed. This was strong, ingrained suspicion of Gentiles. And so,
and we see this in places like Jubilees, right? Where in Jubilees it says that you're not even allowed to sit down and eat.
You do not eat. Yeah, because why? Because it leads you to adultery, idolatry, and abandonment of the Torah. So these are man-made. They seem on the outset, okay, that makes sense. That seems like logical religion, but it's not the new covenant. The new covenant is an act of God on the heart of the people whom he chooses. Right. And his choice is not based on gender, ethnicity, demographic, are you a slave or are you free? Anything like that. Why? Because God is faithful to the covenant with Abraham. And that's it. Paul, that's what Paul's trying to explain over and over and over again. And so the cleanse, that verb cleanse, bring it all the way back around, has to do with, is a way of describing the new covenant. The cleansing of the heart is one way of talking about it. Another way of talking about it is after in Acts 11, where the brothers call Peter to task. They're like, what are you doing, man? You went and ate with uncircumcised men. And he's like, well, let me tell you let me tell you what happened. And then at the end, they're just like rejoicing, saying, well, God has granted repentance even to the nations. You'd think like, wow, didn't these guys hang out with Yeshua? Like, why, he's already ascended. And they're just now doing the math on this. And it does seem that it took a while because the social norms were so strong of suspicion of Gentiles. But when Yeshua, you go back to the Gospels, when Yeshua's knocking those, overturning the tables in the temple courts, he's citing Isaiah 56, this shall be a house of prayer for all nations. Right. And you've made it a den of thieves. So he's dealing with a religious establishment or institutionalization that has insulated Jews from the nations. And it's like what Yeshua says, it's like lighting a lamp and putting it under a bushel. Like the light isn't going out.
So when I was responding to Murray via email, I brought up a couple of things, and I'll bring up a couple of extra things that I didn't put in the email. But one of the things that I said was, well, clearly Paul and James still understand that there are laws of clean and unclean. Why? Because they submit to them, right? In Acts 21, Paul is told by James, you need to go to the temple so you can show that you believe that the Torah is still in act today. And he doesn't say, look, I'm clean. I don't need to do that. I'm totally clean. All this is, I'm good. What does he do? No, he goes through 7 days of impurity, of cleansing, so that he can come into the temple, right? And so the other thing is that we do see Gentiles in the temple, right? The Ethiopian who goes to the temple. Now, we don't have a lot of backstory, and admittedly, there's not a ton of information on this, but the Ethiopian goes to the temple. And he's coming back from the temple when the scroll of Isaiah is read to him, so on and so forth. Okay, but why is he allowed in? We can assume that if they thought he was a Gentile, but maybe they didn't, but if they thought he was a Gentile, he had to go through some ritual of conversion to show that he's now a covenant member to be able to go into the temple. Maybe he only stayed in the court of the Gentiles. Okay, fine. There's a lot of different options that could have happened. I'm not trying to be dogmatic one way or the other. But when Paul goes to the temple in Acts 21, he's accused of taking Gentiles into the temple. And he doesn't say, hey, they're all clean now because they've accepted Messiah. He doesn't say, he doesn't even try to bring them in. He still recognizes that this is not allowed. Even if he, let's pretend for a few seconds, I'm not submitting to the idea that Paul or anyone else thought that Peter's vision meant that everyone was ritually clean. I don't believe that. But let's just pretend for a few seconds that he did. He still recognizes, hey, the Gentiles can't just come into the inner court. That's not how it works. They have to stay out there. So we will submit to the authority of the temple. Now, Paul in Galatians says that if he submits to what man wants instead of what God wants, then come on, what's it, right? I'm not
right, but Paul couldn't just say, let's say, think about Yeshua. No, why didn't Yeshua just allow those money changers to keep their operations set up there, their little booths or whatever, at the court? Paul never did that. Paul didn't knock those over. I wonder that if believers, because we know that they continued to worship at the temple,
right?
And then, like you said, Acts 21, we see a little behind the scenes that James or Jacob, Yeshua's brother, is actually overseeing Nazirite vows, and that probably wasn't the only time. It'd be silly for us to think this was just an exception to the rule. I think that there was. It says many here in Jerusalem are zealous for the Torah. And they're believers. So we have to accept that as true. But I think that probably what happened was they recognized, Yeshua said this temple is not going to be here very long. So they knew that their worship there, on the one hand, this is my Father's house. This is a house of prayer for all nations.
Right.
2, it's not going to be here very long, but we're still going to worship here. It's an amazing combination. The fact that Yeshua said it was going to be destroyed did not deter them from worshiping there. Even from Paul, who, when he's leaving Ephesus that last time, says, I'm going to Jerusalem for Pentecost. He's going to go worship at the temple. That's his intention. And I don't believe we're supposed to take away that they were worshiping with hypocrisy. I think they were worshiping God in the temple, and that they were worshiping with spirit and in spirit and in truth, and it was acceptable worship. And some of that worship involved animal sacrifice, and it was acceptable. And this is post resurrection, post ascension. They weren't. It wasn't trying to please men. It wasn't trying to, but I'm getting lost in the weeds here. What I was thinking was, I think that there were Gentiles that they all of a sudden they had to teach Gentiles, say, look, right now, this is the predicament. They have a soreg here. They have this wall that they're going to, if you go, even though we believe that you have every right, according to Torah, to draw close in worship on the Temple Mount, there are presently guards that might very well put you to death, and there's nothing we can do about that.
And in the text itself. All right, let's tell these people to refresh.
You didn't freeze up to me at all, so
I know. I don't know what's going on. This happened last week too, but I apologize for everybody.
The unseen realm is trying to interrupt us, Caleb.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so for those who missed it on the live stream, I apologize, but I read Rushki Bear's comment about not understanding it was about people, and my simple comment to that was that oftentimes we disassociate Peter's vision from the end of that chapter, verse 34. Peter gives his own interpretation where he specifically says, now I understand that God doesn't give any partiality. In other words, and then he talks about that he's the God of all nations. So in other words, Peter himself, it brings it back full circle. And this is the point I was trying to make, is that he brings it back full circle to show, hey, look, it's about people. And this is something that
Exactly.
I think a lot of people within mainstream Christianity, they want to take Peter's vision, but they cut it there. They don't want to take his interpretation. So they all say, see, look, he's talking about food. He's talking about sacrifice. This is about the kosher laws. No, all you have to do is go down to verse 34, get Peter's own interpretation of it, of his own dream. He interprets it for us, and it's about people. So if
I could just add one little bit. Now, Paul in Romans 4 cites David, right, where he says, blessed is the man whose sins are covered. The man who God does not account his sin against him. But we could also look at Psalm 51, where it says, create in me a clean heart, renew a right spirit within me. And David, the king, is crying out because he, as a person who loves God, has absolutely sinned horrendously against God. And yet he is crying out saying, God, forgive my sin. And we know, of course, he was forgiven. That this applies not just for Jews, that this heart that cries out for forgiveness is a gift that God gives to all those that would be blessed. That gift of repentance has to be understood in terms of all these nations being blessed in the seed of Abraham. Like that, these are all different ways of talking about how God brings redemption to the elect, and that God's cleansing of a heart is not something that man's rules can anticipate. Man's can't have a religion or rules that can tell in advance who belongs and who doesn't. Right? We can't, because we would all think that Saul of Tarsus was out.
Right.
Right? We'd all think that Cornelius was out because he was Italian. He wasn't Jewish. We'd all think Timothy was out, even if it was disputed. Well, one parent's Jewish, one parent's not. He wasn't circumcised. He's out. These were real easy ways that the sectarian groups could really kind of consolidate who they wanted.
Elect. Right. You're in the club and you're not.
Yeah, and what the new covenant does, it says, no, that you guys don't understand the Torah. You don't understand the core, the weightiest matters of the Torah.
So I think that we have another comment, another email from someone named Truman. And by the way, just a quick comment to people in the chat room. If for some reason the stream goes down again, don't worry, it will come back. It just takes a little while, and we'll just keep going. And hopefully I'll try to recap what you've missed if it goes down again. I apologize. I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna have to do some research here. Anyway, so Truman wrote in an email. This is totally separate from Murray's email. However, I think that it kind of touches on the end of Murray's email and what he was trying to get at. Truman says this. He says, as I've continued to study Scripture, I've also continuously come across more and more arguments made for the early church. Unfortunately, Catholicism is an extremely deep denomination that's hard to face, and it seems that they have the benefit of being able to recall their early roots in Christianity, namely the early church fathers and apostolic succession. Let's pause right there for a second. I would agree with that. However, people like James White and many others have argued that the Roman Catholic Church, as we know it today, didn't come around until the 4th or 5th century. I tend to agree with that. The idea of like a pope and all those kind of things. The Roman bishop. The Bishop of Rome was not considered in charge of anything. You had both the Eastern and the Western Church. You had the Greek Orthodox and you had the Catholic Church. And really, this becomes a large issue. And of course, then you get into things like, the debate over the filioque and whatnot, which doesn't get resolved until the 1000s. And should we say it got resolved? we shouldn't say that the filioque got resolved because it never got resolved. However, this is really when the big split happens. I mean, like, I'm not talking to you kind of a split, like, you're right, between the Greek Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church. There was always these tensions, but really it comes to a head over the filioque in the 1000s. And so all of this to say that yes, there is this rich history. However, the rich history has somewhat been a little bit distorted, and it's been muddled. You know, recently, and I'll give you a totally separate example of this, but recently Rob took me to the mats on this when I was saying that we owe the Catholic Church a great debt for retaining the scriptures and, you know, maintaining the scriptures for us all the way up until our present time. And Rob said, well, no, that's not true. Look at the work done by Daniel Wallace on this. And Daniel Wallace, what he sent me, Daniel Wallace essentially goes through and proves how the Catholic Church not only was not trying to maintain the scriptures for us, but was actively trying to keep them from people. So, you know,
that's you want a Hoff goes off on. If you want a Wallace goes off,
yeah, that's
ask him. Say, but Dr. Wallace, didn't the Catholics preserve
Church?
The scriptures for us?
Yeah, exactly. And but this is actually a really good point. That no, the Holy Spirit is the one who maintains, and ultimately the Jews are the ones who have maintained the Tanakh for us up until this time. Which, by the way, is I think the meaning, and I know that this is not a popular take, but I think that this is. I get this take from my friend Andre Philippe. Andre Philippe argued with me one time that, and he convinced me that the idea of the Jews, you know, what benefit then is it to be a Jew much in every way, for they've been entrusted with the covenant, with the covenants, and
with the oracles of God,
with the oracles of God, and his argument is that what that means is that they have been entrusted to maintain the Tanakh up until, you know, throughout ages. And if you look at the Jews, they've done that. I'm so far off topic. Let's go back to Truman's.
But it's such a great point, because I got to sneak in a plug for my summer workshop and my upcoming book on Psalm 82. I go into, we talk, one of the sections is the preservation of the scriptures and looking at, you know, how do we think about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but then how do we reconcile things that are similar, things are different when we get to the Masoretic tradition 1,000 years later. And that's an important part of the conversation is exactly what you're talking about. I believe that's Romans 3 that you're citing there.
Right.
Much in every way.
So. Yep.
And I agree with Andre Philippe. Exactly. I think that's exactly what Paul's getting at, is that by God's providence, it sounds crazy to believe, but they didn't have to be believers in Yeshua to be faithful in preserving the scriptures. At least up through, you know, and that is a difficult position, because you'd say, well, like, you know, how could that be, you know? So,
okay, anyway. So let's keep going. Great conversation. Let's keep going with Truman's question here. He goes on. More specifically, I'm trying to understand why the early church fathers were not Torah observant when some have claimed to have been taught by apostles. Surely they would have been Torah observant in that case. Let's pause right there. I would argue that we see now, by the time you get to Eusebius's histories in the 400s, I believe it is, about 500s, 4th century, he's talking about some of the, you know, we get into the idea of the Quatrodecimans, and he's talking about the students of the apostles. You know, this person followed John, and this person did, you know, he celebrated Passover this way. You have Melito of
Polycarp.
Yeah, Polycarp. And then Melito of Sardis, he basically has a Christian, I mean, on Pascha. On Pascha is like, it's been argued, I don't know if I actually take this view or not, but it's been argued that this is essentially a second century Christian Passover Haggadah with history around it as well. Now, whether or not that's true or not, but clearly he is very favorable towards the Passover. Now, let's finish Truman's comment here, but ultimately the reason I bring that up is I'm not fully convinced that we didn't have people following the Torah. And I'm going to bring more evidence here in just a second. So he says, I suppose my question is, what information could you provide, or what resources could you point me towards for facing this issue and how to understand it in a messianic Torah observant mindset? If there's a book, article, etc., I'd appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to go to one other thing, which is, well, actually, do you want to talk about this real quick while I look something up?
Well, I would say we don't want to read the church fathers as if it's a canon in and of itself that is representative.
Right.
You know what I mean? How would I put it? If we apply Yeshua's parable of the sower, right? So there's like 4 different domains that the seed goes, right? You feed the birds, right? Those are the ravens that, like, the seed just goes, falls by the wayside. It sprouts up really quickly, but then due to the heat, right, when it comes to trials, it can't, there's no faith, so there's no perseverance.
Right.
And then there's the seed that goes among the thorns, never bears fruit. And then there's the good soil. I look at it like that. I look at, like, whenever you look at the church fathers, look at it like, okay, there's all 4 domains are going to be here. There's going to be stuff that, and it's the same with like the rabbinic world, right? I mean, there's countless stuff written in the rabbinic world about the Bible, but that doesn't mean we all go, oh, this is representative of large groups of people. I think there's always been a remnant, and a lot of the remnant, we're never going to know their names this side of eternity.
So
they lived for God. They sought to walk in his ways, and they died, and God knows who they are.
So in the 4th century, I agree with you. However, I think that there's a bigger number of people that existed, that celebrated, that kept the Torah than what we are being told. For instance, the Council of Laodicea, which took place from 363 to 364, in Canon 29, this is where the church says you cannot, if you're a Christian, you can't celebrate the Sabbath. Well, why in the world would they have to say that in the 4th century? Why would they say that? Because clearly Christians were still celebrating the Sabbath. Otherwise, if they weren't, they wouldn't have to say the Christians shouldn't be celebrating the Sabbath. You're Judaizing if you are celebrating the Sabbath. So what my point here is that the reason that at the Council of Laodicea, which was a smaller council, but even so, the reason that they had to make Canon 29 in this council is because they were facing Christians who were still celebrating the Sabbath, and they saw it as Judaizing. Obviously, this wasn't Judaizing. We had believers who were continuing to celebrate the Sabbath. The same thing with the Quatrodecimans. Why were people debating whether or not the Quatrodeciman controversy, should believers celebrate the Passover on the 14th of Nisan or not? Well, clearly it's because there were believers who were still celebrating Passover on the 14th of Nisan. Beyond this, and I've mentioned this before, there's a great book out there. It's extremely expensive, and if I ever have my library, my dream library, then you'll be able to get it from my dream library. But anyway, the point is that there is a great book on the tax, right, on the Fiscus Judaicus, and basically in this book she argues that there was this tax that was imposed after the temple fell in 70, and they said every Jew has to pay a huge amount of money. It was a huge amount of money, and now that it's not going to the temple, you got to give it to Rome. And basically what happens is the tax collectors go out and come back with a little bit of money, and they say, whoa, where's all the money? And they say, well, all these people said they weren't Jews. They say, okay, look, if you keep the kosher laws, if you worship on Saturday, if you're circumcised, you keep these Jewish festivals, you are Jewish. Well, guess what? Within 20, 30 years, all of a sudden the interpretations on Paul have shifted. If you have the choice between having to pay the government $5,000 in gold or just saying, look, Paul said we don't have to do these things anymore, I think a lot of people chose the latter. And so anyway, I think this is one of the reasons that you see, but ultimately, and this is the last thing I'll say before I pass it back over to Rob, Ultimately, this had to happen. Why did it have to happen? Because we have the prophecies that tell us in the end times the Jews will come to Christ, but the nations will wait expectantly for his Torah. We see that in the end times, 10 Jews will take a hold of 10 Gentiles will take a hold of one Jew's tzitzit and say, teach us about your God, right? Well, why? The answer to that is because somehow the Gentiles had to reject the Torah. And we see this. We see this in history. We see that the Jews have rejected Christ as a whole, and the Gentiles as a whole have accepted Christ, but have rejected the Torah. And this is one of the reasons I continue to say that we're in a reformation. Okay, I'm going to pass back to Rob. Rob, thoughts?
Yeah, just like there was a blindness on Israel, there's a blindness on the Gentiles. It's just a different kind of blindness. But yeah, in the end, I think this is a position of Torah resource, of Telos Torah, of pronomianism generally, is that in the end, Yeshua, when Yeshua is revealed in all his glory to the whole world, the Torah, it's going to be equally clear that his Torah is also eternal in the heavens. Like that, those things will all be resolved, I think. But right now, in God's wisdom, he has super pious Jews who are real pro-Torah, but they're entrenched in traditions of men and suspicious of Gentiles. And if any Gentile is being interested, has to go through all sorts of obstacle courses of conversion and denial even of the Messiah. And then on the Christian side, you have all sorts of public expressions of devotion to Jesus as the true Messiah, et cetera, and a rejection of the Torah of God. And so it's a strange, we just live in a real strange time, but I trust that this is God's doing. There's blindness on both parts to certain things. And in the end, it'll be shown that God is merciful, that the Torah is true, and that Yeshua will be beheld in Yeshua's glory will be beyond what even the most devout Christians imagine, and will be beyond what the Jews imagine for any Messiah.
We have to remember also that there is a huge amount of change within a very small amount of time. Now, right now, for instance, from the time that we have, keep in mind this is one generation. My father comes to Torah in the late 80s. I'm young. I'm 6 years old when my dad starts going to a Messianic Jewish synagogue and we start celebrating we start keeping Torah, right? So I'm young. Now, fast forward to 2025. I am 43, almost 44 years old. There has been a lot of change. And if you look at my belief compared to my father's, the core tenets are certainly there. But in practice, we are actually a bit apart at this point. Now, we're talking about a time period where the nation that we live in supposedly is Christian, right? We have a Christian foundation. So Judaic Christian in nature, and these things have been ingrained in the society, at least for a while. If you look back at what happens in the first century, you have not only the surrounding culture is predominantly pagan, right? I mean, you have a pagan, it's not Judeo-Christian in any way, shape, or form. It's pagan.
And at every street corner, corner.
And the more I read about Corinth, the more I'm like, yikes, man. These guys are everyone's steeped in this paganism, right? But then what happens? In 70, this war breaks out. The Jews scatter. So what you did have of a core group of Judaism now scatters all over. They're everywhere. And the temple, the main place of worship, falls. And even Judaism is in the Judaisms, I should say, of the first century are in complete disarray. What do we do now? We don't have the temple. We don't have the festivals. Like, what? Oh, no. And so you have all these things happening, and the society around is completely pagan. And you have an influx of pagans coming to what we could think of as a brand new sect of Judaism. But all this change has happened. So it's not just like, why did they lose the Torah? I think that things were so shaken that there was no foundation to rest upon. Sure, you had people over here that were teaching, but you had people over here that were teaching. And now you have these pagans who come in, they've found Christ, they're reading the scriptures, what they have, and they're interpreting them without commentaries. They didn't have 15 commentaries on 1 Corinthians sitting on their shelf. They read it and they took Paul at what they thought he was saying. So I think that there's a lot that goes into the idea of why was it that the early Christian church so quickly moves away from Torah observance. I think that I don't think it's like one or two things. I think it's just this, it's a powder keg, and it explodes when the temple falls, and there's just smatterings all over the place. Total destruction, and then we see that again, even, and then the final split, of course, is with my book is in here. Not Maimonides. Who am I thinking of? The Morning Star, the false Messiah who rises in the 2nd century, right? And he wants the Christians to join.
Bar Kokhba, yeah.
There we go, Bar Kokhba, yeah. And he wants the Christians to join him to overthrow Rome. And what did the Christians say? No, we can't do that. Why? Because if we fly the flag of a false Messiah, then we're denying our Messiah. And Bar Kokhba and his followers saw this as a complete turn against the people of Israel, the people, the Jews, not just against Bar Kokhba, but they saw it as it's the final split. So I think that there's a lot within that first 100 years after Yeshua's death, resurrection, and ascension that plays into all of this. It's not just a couple of things here or there. Anything else to say on that?
Yeah, I would just, just a reminder of Yeshua's words, I will build upon this rock, I will build my ecclesia. And that's the confession, that Peter says, you are the Messiah, you are the King of Israel, you are the Son of the living God. And Yeshua says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And it's on this rock that I will build my ecclesia.
Right.
So what that means is the true church, the true ecclesia that Yeshua is building, each of the stones, of the living stones, is a revelation from the Father on the heart of that living stone. It's not flesh and blood revealing it to the individuals who make up the true, quote, church. That it is back to full circle back to Murray's question about what is being cleansed. It's just like God says, I will be who I will be. I will have compassion upon whom I will have compassion. I will have mercy upon whom I will have mercy. And Yeshua says, I will build my ecclesia. These are all to be understood together. And in the end, we're going to see a glorious house, a glorious church, ecclesia, whatever term we want to use, that is Yeshua's building, and it's going to be perfect. And we're going to be able to see what Yeshua did at every moment in history and who were the key living stones that he redeemed and washed and prepped for their specific time and how they dealt with their specific circumstance. And I think that's a really good point that Caleb's making, is that we remember things were moving really fast. There was danger at every turn. We didn't have the scribal among the distribution and the promulgation of, let's say, Gospel of Mark or Gospel of Luke or whatever, or the epistles being copied over and over and over again. There was no school where they all went and there was like a scribal master making sure everybody copied accurately. No, these were copied under duress, probably by people who were less equipped for the task, but they knew the value. And so they did their best to copy either fragments or larger sections or complete books and try to carry that written message along with the verbal proclamation of Yeshua as king to new communities. Sometimes it was just copy from Greek to Greek. Sometimes it was taken to Greek and translation it into Coptic or Aramaic or Latin, right? It's an amazing story. And to appreciate it all, we have to get into all these disciplines like archaeology, like text criticism, like Caleb's looking at the history of religions, the history of like paganism in a location like Corinth or in the Mediterranean more broadly. And like we've talked about, Jerusalem and under Rome, and then the destruction of the temple. Like there's so many things that happen in just a short period of time that we just don't have a historical record that tracks everything that we would like to at this point. But back to Yeshua building his ecclesia, we should have unshakable confidence in Yeshua's wisdom and his power and the glory that once we're able to behold, whenever that is, the fullness of his ecclesia, we're going to be in awe, and we're going to be rejoicing with saints that on this side of the eternity we never knew their name. We never knew who they were because they were never written down. But we're going to learn, wow, you did that. Wow, that's what your situation was, and you did that, and we're going to be glorifying God. So if we just look to the church fathers and Catholic kind of testimony to its own self, we're going to, they want you to believe that is the church that Jesus is building, is the Catholic, you're right, is all this gold and the Pope with the hat and all the weird stuff. No, that's not the church. So let's not accept their testimony of themselves.
Let's, I know this might be unpopular because it's about 4 minutes early, but I think we're going to call it there because if we went into another question, I think that we would actually be way over. But that's okay. Hey, if you have questions or comments for us, you can always send them to us. Give us an email, chegg@torahresource.com, chegg@torahresource.com. You can also call our comment line. You won't talk to us. You talk to answering machine. Tell us how much you love us. Hey, disagree with us. How much you love my new bookshelves behind me. It doesn't matter. You can tell us whatever you want. And then, of course, find all sorts of stuff, Messiah Matters, including your executive producer credits. And, of course, don't forget Telos Torah. And Rob has just posted a link in the chat room. TelosTorah.com is where you can sign up for the summer workshop for Psalm 82. I'm signed up. I don't know for sure, but I think I might have been the first one to sign up. So
you think you were one of them?
Yeah, exactly. So
were. I think you were. You were the first because it was that morning we had it set up.
Boom. I would
forever on the books, man.
That's right.
Forever number one.
I would encourage you guys. I've been getting a lot of questions about when Hebrew and Greek will start again at Torah Resource Institute. And of course, these aren't people that are listening to our show, I don't think. But the answer to that is that Telos Torah is taking over all of that and will be offering those, I think, in September. I don't know that for sure.
Yeah,
but
I'll have dates out in this next couple of weeks.
And I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I'm thinking about taking Hebrew, but I don't know if I should jump in advanced Hebrew. I don't know. I'll have to talk to Rob. But anyway, it's going to be worth your time and worth the money for sure. So look for that. And of course, if you're not already, don't forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. It really does help us. Give us a thumbs up. All right. Well, we hope that this conversation has done at least one thing. That's to glorify our great God and Savior, Yeshua the Messiah. Why? Well, I think you know why. Because Messiah matters.